of a newer voice in the Republican Party, transforming and expanding the national and party conversation on a wide range of policy topics from personal freedom to surveillance to monetary policy, race relations, foreign policy, and others. He is noteworthy in particular for his appeal to college students, minorities, and libertarian-leaning Republicans and independents. He is beyond doubt one of the most interesting and thought-provoking elected officials of our age, and he is Exhibit A, that the Republican Party is a living, breathing, evolving big tent. Please join me in welcoming this evening's keynote speaker, the junior senator from the Commonwealth of Kentucky and prospective candidate for President of the United States, Ron Paul. Ron Paul.
Rand Paul.
Rand Paul. Thank you for that.
I have to say, that's not the first time that's happened. I go to church with a guy for 25 years, he still calls me Ron Paul. All right, so there have been some rumors that I might run for House office. My wife has heard these rumors, all right? But she was surprised to find out that I was running for the Speaker of the House. I came home and I got not quite as many votes as Daniel Webster, but I got one vote for Speaker of the House. And so the media asked me about this, and I said, well, it was just 217 votes short. I would have been the first senator elected. When I was first elected up there, my dad and I did a few interviews together, and my dad told me in the interview, he says, yeah, if he works hard and behaves, maybe someday he can be elected to the House also. I'm buddies with Daniel Webster from playing baseball. I think he maybe promised not to tell you what the score has been lately, but it hadn't been good. Republicans play the Democrats. It's for charity. It's for the Boys and Girls Club in D.C., and I don't think we've gotten within 15 runs in the last 4 years. They have a pitcher who played baseball in college, and my question to them is, you damn Democrats believe in so many regulations, why don't we have a regulation that says your pitcher can only pitch for 2 innings? They're winning 20-0, and they have their college pitcher in there every other. You know, they're all for fairness in the marketplace, but not on the ball field. I'll tell you that much. Now, I've had some ideas about how we fix transportation in our country, and I've worked with Congressman Micah and talked with him about some of these ideas. I have a great plan. You need more money for roads? What about we cut the tax on American profit overseas and bring the money back home, and don't stick it in the black hole that is the general budget, stick it in the transportation budget. We've talked about that. There was a little girl, you may have heard about her, she wanted $100, so she said she'd do good things with it. She wrote a note to God. She said, "Dear God, please send me $100. Postmaster didn't quite know what to do with it, so the postmaster sent it to the president. The president was like, well, that's cute. The president said to his assistant, said, $75. She'll think that's a lot of money. So the little girl got the $5. She was a little bit underwhelmed, but her parents had always write a thank you, so she did. She said, dear God, thanks for the money, but next time don't send it through Washington. They stole the 95%. There is a moral there. If you want to know the moral of government, don't send your money to Washington. It's not that they lack intelligence, or I think we've already heard there's a dearth of wise men there. It's not that they're inherently stupid, although it's a debatable question. I tell people they're just not good with money. Congress shouldn't be given more responsibilities. They can't run the post office, all right? The post office loses $4 billion in a year. They come before my committee and they say, you know what, we need to give them raises. I said, why? They said, well, you can't keep talented people without paying them real money. And I said, how much talent does it take to lose $1 billion a quarter? I'll do it. I'll do it for $1 million. We got to pay a guy $2 million that loses $1 billion a quarter. There is no answer for fixing the post office other than this. And nobody in Washington ever wants to hear the real answer to something. The post office, 80% of their expenses are labor. UPS, a successful company we're proud of in our state, is unionized, but their labor costs are 50%. FedEx is non-unionized, their labor cost is 38%. Anybody venture a guess what the post office problem is? The only way they would ever fix the post office is they should declare bankruptcy and reorganize, kind of like what Illinois needs to do. You may have heard that the government shut down a while back. There is a difference, though, between the way people in your state and at home see this and the people in Washington. In Washington, everybody was wringing their hands and pulling their hair and so concerned the government shut down. I get home and people haven't even noticed. The president was afraid you might not notice. He was afraid those in flyover country might not notice the government was closed. You know what the president did? He went 15 miles outside of Mount Rushmore to where you pull over to the scenic overlook. All right, it doesn't cost any money. There's no attendant. There's no entrance. He sent workers out there to barricade so you couldn't pull over the road to see Mount Rushmore to make sure you were punished for closing the government down. But my favorite was the World War II monument. Has no entrance, has no exit, has no attendant. I'll mow the grass, okay? I like to mow my grass. I'll go out and mow the grass for free. But they barricaded it. They were afraid you wouldn't know that the government was closed. They sent government workers out, I'm assuming paying them overtime. These are unionized workers, for goodness sakes. So you send them out there and they wrap it, completely wrap it with barricades. But if you want an image to remember, an image in your mind to remember of what happened during the shutdown, remember this image. The World War II veterans getting off the bus, clipping the barricades, throwing them on the bus, and then throwing them on the lawn at the White House. During the shutdown, they sent us a list, and they said, please identify for us the workers in your office that are essential and unessential. I said, man, we're going to learn something. This is going to be an instructive case. We're going to figure out something good about government. So I started trying to make decisions who's essential and who was unessential. And I said, let's call the IRS. Let's call the EPA. Let's see what their list looks like. So we called the IRS. 90% unessential. I said, call the EPA. Call the EPA. This is going to be such a learning experience. We're going to fix government once and for all. EPA, 95% unessential. But you know, nothing's ever as it seems in Washington. You think you have Disney World here? It's Disney World in Washington. You know why all of the employees are unessential? Because during a shutdown, if you're unessential, you don't have to work, but you still get paid. It costs us more to have the government closed to have it open. Only in Washington can you close something and it costs you more. Government is riddled from top to bottom. When's the last time we went through it item by item and tried to cut things? Calvin Coolidge. A little bit under Reagan, but the compromise under Reagan, we did a good job cutting taxes, but the Democrats were still in charge of the legislature. What we really need now is we have Republicans in charge of the legislature, but we got to have a Republican president if we're ever going to do anything. When we were trying to figure out essential from unessential, something extraordinary happened. The House had some hearings and they started looking at specific employees in the EPA to see what they were doing. They found one woman who had hired 17 relatives for paid internships. Found another woman who was selling vitamins and cosmetics from her computer. They found another guy that was downloading porn 6 hours a day. And you think to yourself, well, thank goodness we fired him, right? These are federal employees, my friends. You can't fire a federal employee. The guy that's downloading porn is now downloaded Nickelodeon or something, but he's still at work. You remember when we had the VA waiting lines? And everybody said how tragic it is that a veteran could maybe die or commit suicide waiting in line to get into the VA. You think, well, they get fired, right? No, it's against the law to fire federal employees. Your government is so dysfunctional that even when we identify something wrong, we can't fix it. Now, we finally fixed the VA. We had to pass a piece of legislation to say you could fire people. You remember Benghazi? You remember the disaster that was Benghazi? You know who was responsible. I know who was responsible. But she skirted away. She blamed people underneath her. But you know what they did with the people underneath her? They transferred them to other offices. We called for months trying to get one of them to answer the phone. They wouldn't get us to the person, but they never left. They just kept working, or they stayed home and were paid. And then John Kerry reinstated all of them. People ask me, what's the worst thing this president has done? Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, all the new regulations, the executive orders that, take the law into his own hands. And I say, really, the worst thing this president has done is the usurpation of power. It's the collapse of the separation of powers. This is a big deal. This is what our country was predicated on. This was the Constitution that gave us the co-equal branches, the checks and balances. Madison said that what we would do was pit ambition against ambition. Congress would have ambition to protect their power. The president would have ambition, and those ambitions would compete, and that would be the checks and balances. But for about 100 years, it's been going the wrong way. Congress has been just giving up their power by leaps and bounds. We don't write any laws. The lowest bureaucrat in the executive branch has more power than any congressman or any senators. Obamacare wasn't written by us. Remember Nancy Pelosi? She said you can read it when it's done. It was 2,000 pages. You thought that was terrible? It was terrible. But the real law is 20,000 pages written by people you didn't elect. Bureaucrats write the rules. We don't write any of the rules. We write a skeleton for a bill. Most time nobody reads it. The bills are not read. Do you know what a continuing resolution is, or an omnibus, or a cromnibus, or I call it the crumnibus? It's just it's 1,000, 2,000 pages put on your desk that day and nobody reads it. You can't possibly read it. You can't physically read it, except for some cleric who works for somebody does, and they stick their pet projects into it. Nobody reads these things. Nothing good changes. We go from deadline to deadline, and then when the deadline comes, we either pass it or the government shuts down. It's two choices. It's a binary choice, neither of them good. Shutting down the government isn't a great concept. It's not a great way to run your government. But passing 2,000-page bills that no one reads is not a good idea either. I have a bill, and sometimes I'll put in my introduction, it's called Read the Bills Act. Everybody kind of titters, and it's like, my goodness, certainly we wouldn't have to have a bill to tell them they have to read the bills. Mine is a waiting period. Mine says you have to wait 1 day for every 20 pages. I keep busy for that. The other thing that annoys people, myself included, but particularly the people when I go back home and talk to folks in Kentucky, is that how do you write rules that you don't make applicable to yourself? How do you exempt yourself from your own rules? So I have another constitutional amendment that says Congress shall pass no law that they exempt themselves from. In the end, if none of it works, why don't we have term limits? You know? There is no monopoly of knowledge up there. You know, I've been in the private sector. I was a doctor in private practice for 20 years. I get to Washington, and one of the senators comes up to me, and he says, the first 6 months you're here, you'll pinch yourself, and you'll say, how did I get here amongst all these important people? And then he said, the next 6 months you'll pinch yourself and say, how the hell do the rest of these guys get up here? There is no monopoly of knowledge. We get beaten down when we don't really have the ability or desire to change things. I'll give you an example on taxes. What passes for bold in Washington is revenue-neutral tax reform. I tell people if that's what we're for, I'll go home. Revenue-neutral tax reform means half of you are going to pay more and half of you are going to pay less, and we're going to simplify it. I'm all for making it more simple, but you're not going to help the economy unless you leave more money in the productive sector and less money in the non-productive sector. We should argue head-to-head with the Democrats on which is the productive sector. We should argue that a tax cut is a stimulus. We should argue that it works because you're giving money back to people who earned it. You're giving money back to people the community has voted upon. A businesses is the ultimate democratic process. It's called democratic capitalism. Those who succeed sell stuff voluntary to everybody else, and you vote every day on who's going to be the best businessman by buying their stuff or not buying their stuff, businessman or woman. And the thing is that if you give the money back in form of a tax cut to those people, that's the people who make jobs. That's the people who create jobs. But if you take it from the people, like the president did through his stimulus, and then you choose somebody and say, here's $100,000, why don't you start a Pizza Hut? Half of small businesses fail. That's why a government stimulus doesn't work. They pick the winners and losers. It doesn't work. We don't know who to pick. Think Solyndra. Think crony capitalism. Think that most of the people that got the Department of Energy loans were Democrats and big bundlers for the president. He says he's for the middle class. Don't buy it. He's given a $500 million loan to one of the richest people in our country. That's crony capitalism. I'm not wanting to give any one of you anything specifically. The general welfare is I want everybody to do better, but not any one individual specifically. That's what crony capitalism is. We need to convince the vast majority of the public that we aren't for the rich fat cats. We aren't for the big business people. We're for the general welfare. When that gets transmitted across to all people, people are going to wake up and say, you know what? Poverty's worse under this president. You know what? Income inequality is worse in cities run by Democrat mayors. Income inequality is worse in states run by Democrat governors. Income inequality is worse in countries run by Democrat presidents. Black unemployment is still twice white unemployment. I don't think that the president doesn't care. I don't accuse him of bad motives. I think he does care. But it just isn't working. When we become the dominant party again, nationally and in presidential elections, is when we convince people that we do care about people. We care about those who live in poverty. We care about those who are unemployed. And it's a debate over what works and what doesn't work. When we get to that point, we'll win. When I think of this presidency, and I think of all the scandals, I think of sort of the old McDonald rhyme, old McDonald's farm of scandals. Here a scandal, there a scandal, everywhere a scandal. But when I think of what is the worst thing this president has done, it is that collapse of powers. But when I think of what scandal bothers me more than any, it's probably Benghazi.
Amen.
The thing about it,
Amen.
is the government has few things that they need to do, and they need to do some of them well. And one's defend the country, defend our missions, defend our embassies, defend our American interests, wherever they may be. For 9 months, Hillary Clinton was asked repeatedly for more security. At every turn, she turned them down. Some of it was this absurd political correctness. There were mission statements given to our soldiers in Libya not to wear their military boots because they might offend the Libyans. They were told not to show their weapons. They might offend the Libyans. When they finally sent people in on that night, they were told to change out of their uniforms in Italy. Cost them 90 minutes changing out of their uniforms. These are people that are so worried about showing the Libyans that we have guns that we got an ambassador assassinated. In January that year, they let go 6 special forces, one team. In March, they let another 6 special forces go. In April, another 6 special forces. In April, the team in Libya said, we'd like a DC-3, a 50-year-old plane, but a plane nonetheless to ferry us around if we have a problem. Denied by Hillary Clinton. 3 days after she denies the plane, there was a request by the ambassador in Vienna. He wanted an electrical charging station for his Chevy Bolts. Seems he was greening up the embassy in Vienna. Global warming and this idea that they want to show how green they are in Europe was more important than the mission in Benghazi. They spent $100,000 on a charging station while turning down a plane. Ultimately, that plane became important, or the absence of that plane became very important. You get to the summertime. What happens all summer under Hillary Clinton's watch? Well, let's see. They spent $100,000 sending 3 comedians to India on the Make Chai Not War tour. That's money well spent. $650,000 on Facebook ads trying to get more friends for the State Department. They spent $5 million on crystal glass and barware for the State Department, for our embassies. But when it comes to the middle of August and Ambassador Stevens is sending cable after cable requesting more security, saying that they are in imminent danger of being run over by a full-on assault, asking that Colonel Wood and his 16-member security team remain, these cables aren't read. They fall on deaf ears. So when Hillary Clinton comes before my committee in the investigation, I said to her, by not providing defense, by your dereliction of duty, by not being there for our troops and for our people when we needed you, you should forever be precluded from running for higher office. When we talk about how we're going to expand and grow the party, I tell people one of the things is we have to have compassion, and we have to show it, and we have to understand when things are not fair. I think there are problems in our criminal justice system. We have people sometimes being put in jail for 50 years for sale of marijuana. Now, I'm not up here to promote marijuana or to say it's good, but I am up here to say that predominantly the people going to jail for these crimes are black, brown, poor, white, but they're people without the same circumstances we have. But if you look at surveys, white kids are using drugs also. They live in the suburbs. Police don't control that. It's not an overt racism, it's an inadvertent outcome. But it is a racial outcome. And we're mistaken if we don't understand it. Many of us in here, for religious reasons, believe in redemption and second chances. I think we do need to be the party of second chances, the party that says when you've reformed your way. Most of these people are young people. The average male that does commit these nonviolent crimes by 25 is reforming and growing up. The thing is we need to understand what is going on here. We have something called civil forfeiture in our country. It means the government can take your stuff without ever having charged or convicted you. It's why I'm opposed to Loretta Lynch. She took $110 million from people in New York without charging. We should simply say, sure, if you're a drug dealer and they convict you, by all means, take all of your stuff. Take your car, your house, everything. But what's happening is, and I'll give you an example. In Philadelphia 3 months ago, a teenage kid was caught selling $40 worth of drugs out of the house. They took the house. They evicted the family from the house. Many of these people are grandma, and grandma's the stabilizing force in a family that's struggling, where there are oftentimes no men around, and the grandma's the only one left with the possession of the house is taken because a 15-year-old kid's selling marijuana. All I'm saying is if we have some compassion and think about these issues, there are people on the evangelical right who are for sentencing reform. This isn't a liberal idea. In California, about a month ago, they passed something saying, let's take some of these felonies, nonviolent, and make them misdemeanors. And you know what happened within 4 months? No more early release for violent criminals. In California, for 10 years, they've been releasing violent criminals who only served 10 and 20% of their time because they got too many people who were convicted of nonviolent felonies. I think if we are to think about how we're going to win again, we've got to think about new issues and ideas. One quick story before I end, and this is kind of out of sequence, but Jason reminded me of this about talking about Obamacare. You guys love Obamacare, right? Yeah. My favorite story about socialized medicine is there was a guy named McGrevy. He was the Pan Am bomber. Okay, so they had him in jail for England. They caught him, they had him in jail, and he had prostate cancer. And he was said to be terminal, and they gave him compassionate release. I think a dumb idea. He got a hero's welcome when he went home for being a killer. But anyway, they release him. And the doctor in England said he had 3 months to live. And so he gets back to Libya, and like 6 years later, he's still alive. So they go and interview this doctor in England, and they say, you must be a pretty crummy doctor, because you said he was going to live 3 months. He's been alive 6 years. He said, no. I said he would live 3 months under socialism instead. The truth of the matter is what happens is things are rationed. The liberals will say, oh, that doesn't happen. That's all that happens in England. In the last 6 months of your life, you're only worth $26,000 and 322 cents. I mean, you only have a certain amount of money that can be spent in the last 6 months of life. There's a drug we give for macular degeneration. You had to prove you were blind in one eye before they let you use in the other eye. For many years, you wouldn't get dialysis after 50 because you were over the hill, which I really take offense to down there. The biggest thing about Obamacare was about choice and coercion. And if we keep the debate about that, and that we too can have a safety net, but we keep it about whether or not we're a country that believes in voluntarism versus coercion, I think we'll continue to win that battle. But it's a tough battle. And finally, I would say the way we win again, and the way we win nationally, is we have to present our message with optimism. There's a poet by the name of Robert Henry, and he said to young painters, not a poet, a painter, he said to young painters, he said, paint like a man coming over the hill singing. I like the image of that. I think if we become the party that proclaims our message with the passion of Patrick Henry, but also like a painter coming over the hill singing, like a man coming over the hill singing, if we proclaim our message with that kind of, exuding that kind of optimism and happiness, I think we will win again. Thank you very much.
Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky.